Okay, the purpose of this video is to sort of give a quick crash course on how to write the argumentative FRQ, which will be the fourth FRQ on the AP test in May. This is meant just to be a quick review guide, especially for the people that were absent the day we reviewed it in class. Okay, so what is it? The argumentative FRQ is going to give you some sort of opinionated question, and you're basically graded on how you support your answer, right? So you'll always have to take a stand on an issue. And then you'll specifically need two pieces of evidence to basically support whatever your opinion is, right, on the topic that you're writing about. The first piece of evidence that supports your opinion always has to be drawn from one of the foundational documents that we've gone over during the course of the year. That's like the Fed 10s, Fed 51, Brutus 1, like that kind of stuff, Declaration of Independence. And the second piece of evidence can be from another one of the documents, or it can just be something from AP Gov that we talked about. It can be non-document related evidence. It's also important to note that the Constitution is the only document that you can use for both pieces of evidence. It's the only document you can like double dip on, like so to speak. So you could use something from like two different parts of the Constitution, two different amendments. Amendments are fair game. They're considered to be part of the Constitution. Something from the actual main body of the Constitution and an amendment, that's fine, right? And then on AP test day, you'll have 100 minutes to complete all four FRQs. This is just one of the four. And you can allot that 100 minutes however you want. College Board recommends 25 minutes on each, right? That's the even 100 minutes. But chances are you're going to want to probably get through the other FRQs quicker to be able to spend a little bit more time on this guy. So this is what it looks like. This is an argumentative FRQ from a couple years ago. So the directions are pretty confusing. It's not as complicated as it sounds. You're always going to have like a question or a prompt that's up here, directions and documents. The documents will change, the question will change, but the rest of these directions will be pretty standard. So this particular practice question says, develop an argument that explains whether or not the Electoral College should be abolished and be replaced with direct popular election. So it's basically saying like, hey, would you like getting rid of the Electoral College and just moving the presidential election to whoever gets the most votes across the entire country wins, right? So you're going to have to take a stand. You're going to have an opinion on that question. You're going to have to say, yes, we should abolish the Electoral College, or no, we shouldn't. And then it tells you that in order to get full credit in this essay, you have to articulate a defensible claim or thesis that responds to the prompt and establishes a line of reasoning. That's like what's your opinion and why. You're going to have to support your opinion with at least two pieces of accurate and relevant information. At least one piece of evidence must be from one of the following foundational documents. So for this particular practice question, the first piece of evidence has to be coming from either the Constitution, Brutus 1, Fed 51, or Fed 70. So you're going to have to think about those documents, some of the points we reviewed in those documents, and you're going to have to pull something from one of those documents that supports your overall opinion, right, about the Electoral College. And then you have to use a second piece of evidence from another foundational document above, or from your study of the presidential election process. So for your second piece of evidence, you could use another one of these documents, or if you use something from the Constitution for point 1, you could definitely use something from the Constitution from point 2 as well. Or you could use another one of the documents, or a document that's not listed, or just a regular point from AP Gov. That's something we talked about that you remember that you feel like supports your opinion. You also have to use reasoning to explain why your evidence supports your claim or thesis. And then lastly, you have to respond to an opposing or alternate perspective using refutation, concession, or rebuttal. We're going to focus on the rebuttal part of that. So it's a complicated question, but what you actually have to write isn't all that difficult. So remember, the question is, develop an argument that explains whether the Electoral College should be abolished and replaced with direct popular election. You're going to have to take a definitive stance. Yes, it should be abolished, or no, it shouldn't. And then you're going to have to find your supporting evidence. So again, right, look at the documents, think about how you could best write this, and then do a little brainstorming and come up with how you would want to do this. Before that you actually like write out anything, you want to think about what your opinion is, what your two supporting details are, but then you also have to think about what the other side that you disagree with, what argument they would make. Because you're required to do 4 things, right? This is going to be like a 4-paragraph essay. And like they don't even have to be super long. In fact, paragraph number 1 is just going to be your thesis sentence. Paragraphs 2 and 3 are probably going to be between 3 and 4 sentences each. And paragraph number 4 doesn't have to be long either. So these are pretty short, but ultimately you have to accomplish some basic tasks in each one of these sections. So the most important thing you have to do in the first paragraph is write your thesis sentence, right? So the way that I'm going to approach this example essay is I'm going to argue, and again, you can argue whatever position you want. I'm going to argue, because I think it's easier to write, that the Electoral College needs to be abolished and replaced with direct popular election. You're welcome to argue the opposite, but I feel like the documents they've given probably make an easier write for that it should be abolished. So the first thing I have to do is I have to go back to the documents and think, okay, what points can I use from at least one of those documents? So the first document I'm going to draw on is the Constitution. So I'm going to try and think about like how a point from the Constitution might support my opinion. And I'm going to think about my other opinion, right? My other supporting detail. And then I'm also going to think about what the other people believe that disagree with me. And I'm going to work that all into one thesis statement. So this is an example of how I want your thesis statement to look. I want you to start with what the opponents believe, right? And you can see how I want you to start the sentences on the left and how it appears in final form on the right. So this is how I'm going to lead off my FRQ. Although some people may believe the Electoral College should remain intact because of tradition, that's what I'm beginning with. I'm beginning what the other side believes. I don't believe this, but I think the Electoral College should be abolished. But I have to start with what the other people believe that disagree with me. So one of the arguments that they make is that, hey, it's just the way we've always done things. It's tradition, right? It's gotten us this far. So why change it now? So again, although some people may believe the Electoral College should remain intact because of tradition, now I need to transition into my opinion. In actuality, the Electoral College should be abolished and replaced with direct popular election. That's now my opinion, right? I've stated that clearly. And then here's my line of reasoning, my 2 reasons that I developed. Because it will more accurately reflect the will of the people and encourages a larger voter turnout. So I've started with their opinion and their reason. I then stated what my opinion was, and I have my 2 reasons. So again, force yourself to do although, and then the opposing stance, and then in actuality, what is your opinion? Because, and mention your 2 points. And this should be one sentence. You'll also note that I didn't mention the name of any documents or anything like that, right? I basically just wrote out the point from the document that I wanted. All right, paragraph number 2 now is the first evidence paragraph. So I have to actually elaborate on my first piece of supporting evidence. So going back to the thesis, this is the point that I pulled from one of the documents. It should be abolished and replaced with direct popular election because it more accurately reflects the will of the people. So my second paragraph, the first evidence paragraph, has to relate to that first evidence point, which is reflecting the will of the people. So this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to accomplish 3 things in each of the 2 evidence paragraphs, right? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the evidence I'm using. The first piece of evidence that supports the need to abolish the Electoral College and replace it with direct popular election is the 17th Amendment in the Constitution. This is my document-related point that I'm using to support my overall opinion that the Electoral College needs to go. So again, I gave you the sentence starters on the left-hand side. Try to use this for plug and play. The first piece of evidence supports, and then your position again is, and then mention the name of the document that you are going to use and the point, right? So that's the first thing I did, is identify the point that I'm using. The second thing I have to do is describe it a little bit. So if the 17th Amendment from the Constitution is my point, I have to just show the reader I know something about the 17th Amendment. So the 17th Amendment established direct election of U.S. senators. Prior to this, senators were actually selected by the states and the people had no say. So I've described what the 17th Amendment is about. I've proved to the reader that I understand what I'm writing about. And then the last thing I have to do is the most important thing. I have to connect the evidence back to my opinion that the Electoral College needs to be abolished, right? How does the 17th Amendment show that the Electoral College needs to be changed? This supports the need to replace the Electoral College with direct election because it shows that changes have already been made to increase the will of the people in other election areas, right? Surely, if people were needed to have a greater say in Senate elections, they should also have a greater influence in presidential elections. I just described that, hey, the 17th Amendment allows citizens to have more of a say over who their senators are. Why wouldn't we also want to do this for president? So again, on the left-hand side, I showed you have to name the evidence, describe a little bit about it, and then connect it to your thesis. So you can see how I did each of those 3 tasks on the right-hand side. You don't actually have to number it in your essay, but it just shows you what part of the response goes along with like the task, right? Then I also need a second piece of supporting evidence. So the second piece of evidence that I'm going to use to support the need to get rid of the Electoral College is just the idea that I pulled from our discussions in AP Gov that getting rid of the Electoral College will actually encourage more people to vote. This doesn't have to be tied to a document. If I just remember talking about this in class, like that works. So I have to, again, just name the evidence. The second piece of evidence, be specific, that supports the need to abolish the Electoral College and replace it with direct popular election is the idea that it will increase voter turnout. So let me just talk about this a little bit now. Let me describe it a little bit more. The Electoral College depresses voter turnout because the candidate with the most popular votes within each state receives all the electoral votes for that state. In some states, there is a clear majority for one political party, such as Democrats in California. Many Republicans may choose not to participate in the election because there is little chance of the party's candidate receiving the most votes. That's something we talked about in class, right? Like, what's one of the arguments against the Electoral College is in states where there is one overwhelming party controlling power, there just might not be a reason for members of the opposite party to vote in the presidential election because they know their candidate's not going to win the state's electoral votes. So again, how can I connect this to the need to get rid of the Electoral College? This supports the need to replace the Electoral College with direct election because citizens would be more willing to vote if their vote was contributing to an overall national vote tally. Getting more citizens to vote is a key part of a healthy democracy. So I've done the same thing. I've stated what the evidence is. I've described the evidence a little bit, and then I connected it back specifically to my overall point that I'm making, which is the Electoral College needs to be abolished. So paragraph 2 and 3 are your 2 evidence paragraphs. Paragraph 2 has to be based on a document. Paragraph 3 can be another document or just something off the top of your head. And literally, you could do each of these tasks in a sentence. The last paragraph, there's not a conclusion. It's basically a rebuttal to an opposing point. So you started your thesis by identifying what other people believe about this question that you disagree with. So if you remember, we started our thesis statement by saying, although some people believe the Electoral College shouldn't be abolished because of tradition, I'm just going to restate that now. Some people believe that the Electoral College should be kept because it's part of our nation's tradition. This is the last paragraph. I'm identifying what other people believe. This is what I started my thesis statement with. But now I just have to go one step further. I just have to explain why they're misguided about believing this. So, however, this is a flawed view because it implies that we should never change the way our government works. If we kept intact all things that were from our country's original founding, necessary changes to abolish slavery and providing opportunities to vote to groups like women and African Americans would never have occurred. So I'm basically just saying, like, hey, yeah, there are a lot of people that believe the Electoral College shouldn't be changed because it's the traditional way of selecting the president. But if we always did the way that things were done, we wouldn't have all these really important changes that have happened. So I just restated what their belief is, and now I explain why it's wrong. This is the argumentative essay. A thesis sentence, 2 supporting points. The first point has to be from a document, the second does not. And then the last paragraph is identifying what the other people believe that disagree with you, but why they're wrong, right? So again, this doesn't have to be super long, but these are the basic tasks you have to complete to get full credit for the argumentative FRQ. And the most important thing that you can do is just take a couple seconds before you start writing on the midterm or on the actual AP test in May and do a little pre-write. Think about, like, okay, here's what the question is. What's my opinion? And then how do the documents basically support my opinion? Do I know anything else outside that might be able to help me support my opinion? What do other people think about this that I disagree with, and why are they wrong? I use those things to make my thesis statement, and then I explain each of those 2 points in my evidence paragraph, and then I use the rebuttal section, which is the last paragraph, just basically to explain what they believe and why they're specifically wrong.